30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
Hi,
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Jonathan Small, host and producer of Face to Face. And Face to Face is one of two different programs that I have the pleasure of hosting and producing live every single week at AccessTV.org studio. Face to Face is a show that's designed to ask the guests the hard questions and give you, the viewers, the answers and information that you deserve to know. This morning on Face to Face, we have a veteran who played a critical role in the early days of cable television. He has a background in communications. He can be labeled as an author, developer, producer, communications counsels. The guest this morning on Face to Face is no other than the founding executive producer of ESPN, no other than Peter Fox. Good morning, Peter. How are you doing?
Good morning, Jonathan.
All right.
First off, I am happy to see that you have the mandatory ESPN Red on this morning. It makes us all just feel like everything came together so smoothly.
It was just a coincidence that I happened to put this shirt on, a Nike red shirt. I was not even thinking about the connection to ESPN, so I'm glad everything worked out for a reason. Peter, could you...
Serendipity.
Yes, thank you. Peter, could you let people know a little bit about yourself and background briefly before we get into our main topics of discussion?
Well, as a street urchin and dyed-in-the-wool sports fan, I began in the newspaper business and graduated from there into the radio business and went from there into the promotion and marketing business and fell in love very, very early with the television business and worked, in fact, for WFSB in Hartford. And then a golfing friend of mine, Bill Rasmussen, who really is the founder of ESPN, called me one summer afternoon where I was lazily playing a little bit of golf and said, "Do you think all sports television will work?" And it didn't take me long to say yes. And the next thing I knew, Bill was recruiting me to be his executive producer, and off we went. And as a young man, it was just following passion. But as a fellow who's got a little time in grade, as I began to think about those days especially during COVID, when there was a lot of restrictions to what we could do, it became pretty clear to me, and I had this intuition for a long time, that many of us who built ESPN didn't quite get the credit that we should have. And so I wrote a book about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you heard about the book and called me and said, "Hey, would you come and talk?" So here we are.
Well,
That's me.
yes, you, Peter. Well, Peter, exactly. ESPN was what technically classified as the first 24-hour all sports channel. Was it technically the first 24-hour all cable station as well?
Oh no.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no. It was the first that probably that uniquely took a niche form of content, sports, followed by music, MTV, followed by news, followed by all food, followed by uh, a number of verticals.
Mm-hmm.
But during that time, that was in the late 70s, the real innovation was satellite technology, where satellite television images could be dropped, so to speak, in a footprint across the country. And there were other full-time channels.
Mm-hmm.
I think of HBO, and I think of Ted Turner actually had uh, a little independent station down in Atlanta long before his CNN. It was WTBS.
Mm-hmm.
And they did old reruns of I Love Lucy and things like that, but it was 24 hours a day and it was off the satellite.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, there was only one satellite in the sky at the time, Satcom 1, and it was owned by RCA. And there were uh, some channels that were available that broadcasters didn't seem to want because the federal government said that if during a national emergency there was they would preempt those stations.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were talking to them, we looked at each other and said, national emergency, there's not going to be any football. So those were attractive price wise to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did.
Well, again, from what I understand, you were technically the first employee of ESPN, the sports cable channel. And did
Uh,
you?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm
I'm
just
sorry.
saying. I thought that did a little research that you were actually the first hiree employee for ESPN. Is that correct, or was there anybody else that was
Well,
employed?
it depends.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm okay saying that because what turned out to be my best friend Lou Palmer, who worked for WTIC, and you may uh, be too young to recall him on the radio, but he was a really, really professional broadcaster with a set of pipes that would just like honey.
Mm-hmm.
They were delicious to listen to. In any event, Lou Palmer, I forget the day. I'd have to look in the book. We walked into ESPN as the first employees together.
Okay.
I think I held the door, so he might qualify as the first.
The first. Okay.
But then again, I could have been if I didn't hold the door. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right. Almost. That's a toss up. Exactly. So when ESPN was established, I believe the headquarters was in Bristol, Connecticut. Long before you got all of these other offices throughout the country that ESPN consists of. Did you?
Actually, to be really, really accurate,
Mm-hmm.
ESPN was born in Plainville on a building at 319 Cook Street,
Mm-hmm.
which housed United Cable Television.
Mm-hmm.
And they were kind enough to rent us one room where we got started. And then as we grew in those 300 days that I described to you, uh, that were prior to launching full time on the air on September 7th, 1979.
Mm-hmm.
In the summer of 1978, and when we got funded, we actually grew so fast that we had to rent their attic.
Mm-hmm.
and we conducted a awful lot of business up in the attic of 319 Cook Street while the studios were being built in Bristol.
Okay. In the early days of ESPN, before a couple of people I'm going to mention became tremendously famous, let's say even through ESPN, Chris Berman, the boomer who does the NFL, who's pretty much known for the NFL countdown, having Dick Vitale cover, I think it was also NBA games, but I know he would eventually be known for calling the college games on ESPN. Was that a easy process to say to select two people on that level, or was it a lot to be able to get someone like Chris Berman and Dick Vitale? Let's just use those two as examples.
Well, the Chris Berman I can talk to directly. Dick Vitale came in a little bit later, but uh, while Lou Palmer and I were uh, anchoring, if you will, the demonstration broadcasts that we produced, so that Bill Rasmussen and the business folks could run around the country trying to raise money. Uh, Chris Berman came to us, knocked on our door, and said, "Hey, I want to work for you." And we said, "Chris, are you the guy that we see on the weather?" He did the weekend weather at Channel 30. Uh, he we said to Chris, Chris, we're barely paying ourselves, and we're not hiring right now. But let's go to lunch anyway, so, because it was time, and he was entertaining. So we did, and Chris at the end of the lunch said, "I'm going to tell you guys that I am going to keep knocking on your doors, that you're going to be so bored of me doing that." And he did. And along the period that Chris was hired, it was because of a relationship he had previously developed when he was in college with Scotty Connell, the big time NBC producer that when we got our money, we were able to hire. They and Scotty and Chris went on to work together for years and years and years, as you know. Dick Vitale came along later in the 80s. I did get the opportunity to work alongside him in 1989 when I went back to ESPN for a the basketball season. It was a fun season where I produced some fun things, and have a couple of stories in the book about that too.
Okay, Peter, in the early days of ESPN, did ESPN cover all levels of sports, professional or college, or was there like a select group of sports that ESPN mostly targeted?
Well, in the very earliest days, if we'd like to reference that, in the very earliest days, we had few, if any, professional sports, although we did do Canadian football, and we did National Hockey League sporadically. We did some professional golf that I am proud to say I was very influential in bringing the first weekday golf telecast to American audiences. And we had a lot of different sports. I remember one of the last sports that I did before I left was I produced All-Star NFL arm wrestling. So,
Right.
so we didn't miss many in those times.
Well, what exactly, I mean, your role as the founding executive producer, were you designed to hire staff and personnel or select the type of sports marketing programs that would be aired on ESPN Cable? Just kind of want to get a little update on your role in the beginning, exactly what you was designed, hired.
In the very beginning, I put together staff. I put together freelancers,
Mm-hmm.
and what we did, I alluded to earlier. We did almost a year's worth of different sports, most of which were done out at the University of Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
um, as a demonstration package uh, while the building was being built. But we needed to show cable companies that we were real and that we produced at a professional level.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did. In the, I want to say, the early summer or late spring of 1979, we were able to find a gusher of money in an investor, Getty Oil, who essentially allowed us and them to reach out to NBC Sports and hire away from them their CEO, their executive producer, and a cadre of other producers who came and worked in that attic that I talked to you about.
Mm-hmm.
And we blitzed the world. And as that period came in, those of us who were the pilgrims, if you will, of ESPN, uh, admittedly were in over our heads and welcomed these folks, even if they did give us the elbow a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a little more than a little bit for some guys. Lou Palmer and I were able to survive that political war for a bit, and then after a while, it became a little less adventurous for me, and so I knew it was time to uh, refresh my body and my nervous system. So I did.
Yeah. Well, Peter, there's an old saying in business, most businesses fail within the first 5 years. And after a 5 year period, let's say for ESPN going on the air in 1979 towards, 1984, it looked like at that time ESPN was well established as a solid sports cable channel. And could you kind of remember any particular sport that stood out, let's say after that 5 year period? It's kind of hard to really say which sport really carried the weight for ESPN. Do you have any?
There is no doubt about which sport, and it's college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
If you, we in fact invented what they call whip around,
Mm-hmm.
where during that Thursday, Friday of the NCAA tournament, where there are 6 or 7 games going on at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and we had live television, and we would whip around to each one. If there was a timeout at one place, we'd go to the next place.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being in the control room where there were several games on at the same time, and it was difficult to tell who was who because most of the teams had some version of red and white in their uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to take little pieces of paper and put them under the monitor, identifying which game was which, so that as we called for switches, the technical directors knew which buttons to hit.
Mm-hmm. But then after a while, going into the 80s, ESPN would establish itself in the NBA, National Basketball Association, the NFL Countdown, as I mentioned earlier. I guess boxing, but maybe not on the level of HBO, but certainly boxing started to appear. So you started to get the major professional sports established going through the 80s. Now, what year did you particularly leave ESPN as well, if you don't mind me asking again?
1981.
1981. Okay. So, was you kind of satisfied, let's just say as a sports fan at the end of the 80s where ESPN had established its presence?
Well, more than satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
We're thrilled
Right.
and proud.
Mm-hmm.
How could you not be?
Right.
Staying on the air would have made those of us who started it proud.
Uh-huh.
But the leaps and bounds that it grew to were just every time I turn it on, there would be a welling of pride in myself, and I'd brag about it.
Mm-hmm.
Who wouldn't?
Right. So ESPN became a well-established business. I guess getting into advertisement, merging, as you mentioned, with Getty Oil. I believe ESPN today is owned by ABC or Disney. So it has actually changed a little bit over the decades towards the ownership level. Do you look at that as a good thing overall, or do you have some issues with how ESPN has?
Oh no, I think well, the folks who are managing it now, i.e., Disney, uh, they bought it at a time where everything was kind of glorious, and then along came things called streaming
Mm-hmm.
and cable cutting, and so they are struggling with how to convert that viewing appetite to new technology.
Mm-hmm.
And cable audiences or cable subscriptions are dropping dramatically. And of course, if you understand the business model, where not only well, it was almost it's a double dip, if you would. We'd get advertisers who'd pay for the eyeballs watching
Mm-hmm.
programs, but then the cable companies would pay us to be able to receive the programs so that they could charge more to you, the subscriber, or you and me, the subscriber.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a double dip. But while the advertising may continue, well, it's watered down because of streaming.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the dramatic cable cutting revenues to uh, cable networks is well, it's not a suicide pill, but it, it's tough.
Well, Peter, would it be fair to say that, and I don't know, this might be outrageous for me to say this, but has ESPN ran its course as a cable operation, and it has to make a full uh 180-degree turnaround into digital streaming? That is there really a need for someone to consistently get up every morning at 6 o'clock and watch ESPN Sports Center, wait till 11 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening when you have the technology to stay abreast on every particular sports component that exists with technology at the tip of your finger? I'm just trying to get your views on the whole technology level.
There's no doubt in my mind that what ESPN did for itself that will continue
Mm-hmm.
unless they really boot it around
Mm-hmm.
is they are the best. They are the go-to brand in sports.
Mm-hmm. Well, that
And
excuse me, that I
no matter
understand.
what the no, it doesn't matter, Jonathan, what the delivery system is.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you.
What matters is what do people trust? What do people look forward to? What do people go to when they think of sports?
Mm-hmm. And
And I will credit then CEO Chet Simmons. I remember the day that he came into Sports Center and said this. He said, "We need to adjust how we call ourselves. We're going to call ourselves from now on the worldwide leader in sports."
mm-hmm. And ESPN definitely can hold that name.
And that was and that was in 1970. That was in 1979. But what he did was like he stuck a stake in the ground.
Mhm.
We're claiming it, and you got to fight us out of it.
Right,
And
right.
no one's been able to do that.
Okay. Well, we clarified something that ESPN stands out as the worldwide leader in sports programming. How people receive sports, we can say it has changed dramatically. Does that still
Yes.
mean that people need to subscribe for cable just to be able to watch ESPN? I guess that's what I was really getting at. You don't really have to subscribe to cable anymore to be able to say I'm going to
No,
watch ESPN.
no,
Mm-hmm.
they're different packages. They're ESPN Plus.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the direct answer to that is no,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a dynamic process. It continues to change
Mm-hmm. And
as
then
technology changes.
yes, and Pete, also ESPN has changed. It still has stuck with sports as the focal points, but you have documentaries, ESPN 30. You
Hmm.
have some form of films. So ESPN has broadened itself over the past, what we're talking, what, 45 years, if you say from
Yeah,
1979. So
45 years.
it's definitely
Oh,
broadening.
well, I'm not so sure about that.
Hmm.
I can remember sitting with Lou Palmer in 319 Cook Street and doing what can we do besides showing a baseball game?
Hmm.
Well, we could do movies. We could do uh, uh, could do. Hey, how about the NFL draft? And nobody's ever shown that.
Hmm.
I bet we could do that.
Yes.
We could do it. We could do. Somebody else came along and said, "Well, we can do award shows, and we can do. How about how about those games that the kids like? You know, the ski jumping and skateboarding and stuff like that. And what do we call it? We'll call that X Games.
Hmm.
So, but it all was sports and competition at its root.
Yes.
I mean, we haven't gone out and done a soap opera yet.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. ESPN has stayed true to its vision in sports. Now your role of I guess of late, coming up with a book of what ESPN the early days. What's the last part of your slogan when you say your book ESPN?
Well, yes, 300 daydreams and
Uh,
nightmares.
Nightmare. Okay, 300 Daydreams and Nightmares. What came up? What had you come up? I mean, what made you come up with the idea of writing this book about ESPN?
I mentioned it earlier. COVID pushed me over the ledge,
Mm-hmm.
but over the years, saying hello to those folks who were the real, I call them espionauts, the those of us who strapped in for a rocket ride for 300 days from the day that Bill Rasmussen hired us to the day that we signed on full time was it, it was an amazing time,
Mm-hmm.
and I made so many close friendships then of the people who were, some were not sports fans, some were just dedicated, passionate television fans,
Mm-hmm.
but some were sports fans as well, and some held a combination of both. But we did something that is a story that was worth telling and never really got told from the perspective of who we were. Now, that is to say, if I looked over and showed you my bookshelf right now, I got 7 or 8 books about ESPN, and they're all written by somebody who wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, we kind of tattled a little bit. We kind of tell the stories of what really went on.
So this book that you have published is gonna be able to show the history of the beginning stages of ESPN towards where it consists today, or just the beginning and the history of the early days of ESPN.
it's primarily those 300 days
Mm-hmm.
from concept to sign on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little spillover.
Mm-hmm.
Now you almost have to in telling the story because those people who were involved in that 300 days went on to do some really special things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a fun at the end of the book. I tried to figure out how can I end this. And so what I did was I tapped into AI and I asked it a question. What would happen if there was no ESPN and you had to create an all sports television network today? And then AI wrote the last chapter for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wrote a little introduction saying basically what I just said, that the only way I can figure out what's going on in the future is to ask somebody who's in the future. And so that's kind of how we closed the book. But it was fun. I was amazed at how much it took out of me.
Mm-hmm.
So after I had finished it, that was during the COVID period, and submitted the manuscript to the uh, publisher. A half an hour before deadline, I'll have you know, the old newspaper man in me
Uh-huh.
kicked in.
Right.
So um, there was it was almost like a period of mourning. I had to let this thing go
Mm-hmm.
because I had spent so much personal time with it.
Right.
It was it was fun. It was a thing that you couldn't do if you were 50 or 60 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You
truth.
had to do it. You had to do it
Uh,
in the sunset years.
right. Well, truthfully, your role again at ESPN, you only stayed from what 78 to 81. You
Yeah,
left kind of early.
just just the birthing times.
Right. Right. And then again, the key people as far as the sports announcers, if people can remember, or if you're old enough to remember, Bob Lee, Tom Mees, and Chris Berman. Was those the three original?
Those were the three principals, and then there's George Grand.
Uh huh.
George Grand worked for WTNH Channel 8.
Uh huh.
And then there were a couple of other guys. There was a wonderful guy by the name of Bob Waller who married that woman that you see on camera 2 there behind me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they had a late night romance going on that was fun.
Right.
And there's a lot of that goes on in the book that we talk about. And beyond, I'm trying to think of who else that you might know. Lou Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty much the announcing crew as when we signed on.
Yeah. And then as we talked off the air, Greg Gumbel would come on a little bit later
He did.
in the early 80s. Dick Vitale, as we also mentioned, he came along a little bit later. Well, he wasn't really a sports announcer. He just covered the college basketball games.
Well, he was a legitimate college coach,
Mm-hmm.
so he had some great stories to tell. The other great asset, as I told you, I went back to work there in 1989,
Mm-hmm.
just for the college basketball season, and that was the same year that uh, Jim Valvano became a commentator for ESPN.
Mm-hmm.
And the night that we kicked off college basketball in early November, I was delivering a halftime package to the producers, and I was walking through Sports Center, and Vital was sitting on a desk with a phone in his ear, and I'm sure nobody else heard him say this because it was just kind of a walk by, but he said, "Honey, I think I've died and gone to heaven."
Right.
I can go into a room and I can watch 6 basketball games at the same time.
Uh, well, well, one thing about Dick Vitale, you can tell. I mean, you can tell he's very passionate, and he loves sports, particularly college basketball. I mean, it just comes across his enthusiasm, his passionateness, his love for it. He's just not he's. I guess he's not acting like a sports announcer to get excited. It's coming out naturally with him, and he
Well,
just
it's appropriate that when they talk about the play-by-play and color commentators, he is definitely colorful.
yes, and one of the best, if you want to say, of all
No doubt.
time. I mean, people love to
No doubt.
listen to his voice. It's a unique voice that he has. There's just a lot of things about him. Now, there's also going to be a upcoming movie about ESPN. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not really supposed to talk too much about that, but we've agreed that I can say that a significant movie studio has uh, contracted with me to develop a feature film based on the content of the book.
Mm-hmm. And then there's going to be some type of get together that you mentioned of former ESPN
Oh yeah,
employees getting
I'm looking
together.
forward to that. There's a reunion of us in November.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Facebook group called ESPN Old Timers, and some of the guys who run that uh, decided it was time for a reunion to celebrate the 45th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, I think there are 350 plus people all signed up for this uh, engaging evening. It's a private group for just us, so uh, it's for employees and former employees, and it's not, by the way, it's not sponsored by ESPN,
Mm-hmm.
and so uh, uh, there's not going to be a lot of uh, corporate no-nos going on.
Is it going to be located at the Bristol ESPN
You know,
headquarters?
it's right across the street. Thanks for asking that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a there's a Bristol Convention Center built virtually across the street from the huge ESPN campus.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I also want to mention as we're getting close to ending this particular show, ESPN does have ESPN Radio, and that's something of a uniqueness that because people love radio too. I mean, it's a misconception that everybody's just into television, but radio is extremely popular. So even if you're not able or you're not interested in tuning in to ESPN on cable or streaming it, you could always listen to ESPN Radio. I guess I don't know if it's 7 days a week, but definitely Monday through Friday. Do you like the radio version of ESPN?
I do, and I have a soft spot in my heart for it because, as I mentioned, in 1989, I went back to ESPN,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I was recruited there by a wonderful guy whose name is Mo Davenport, who is in charge of ESPN Radio now. And Mo at the time was coordinating producer for basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually in the golf business, my second love. And Mo was one of my golf students. And we got talking on the range one day, and he said, why don't you come back?
Mm-hmm.
He said, give me some ideas. And so I gave him some ideas, and he said, come on back for the winter. You can always be golfing in the summer.
Right.
So I did, and it was fun.
What's the future outlook, in your opinion, for ESPN? I mean, do you feel optimistic the way ESPN is established, or do you have some concerns overall about some areas of ESPN?
I I don't have strong concerns. Obviously, they're more operational concerns than they are disdain.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say that um, the influence that Disney has had on ESPN, in my opinion, has uh, turned its personality vanilla,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a little more supercharged, which I've seen them do in a couple of cases. Um, so it's not like they're blind to the subject, but their go-to instinct is vanilla.
Danilo, okay. Well, I don't know if that's a good way to end the show or just the best way to end
Well,
the
I
show.
don't think so.
Okay, and everything, but we have to end at some point. And as I always like to ask the guests towards the end of the show, if there's anything else that they would like for people to know about themselves or what they're doing or what they're planning to do, feel free to do so.
Well, the movie thing obviously is taking up a lot of my time, and uh, the time budget at my age is something that I hoard. But please, there are two ways to get the book. One is Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
and if you want a signed copy, you can find me at earlyespn.com.
All right. Well, Peter, it was an interesting, fun learning experience about ESPN or your role in playing with ESPN. And I really enjoyed you being able to be available this morning on Face to Face. And I wish you the very best of luck in the very near future.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for having me, and I look forward to hearing more face-to-face conversations.
Oh, I really appreciate hearing those words and definitely look forward to that in the very near future. All right. Okay, again, this is Jonathan Small. I just enjoyed hosting this edition of Face to Face with the special guest. He is the founding executive producer of ESPN, and I thought it was a real and interesting, fun type of show that I had enjoyed hosting and producing this week. Currently working on a show and a guest for next week. But as I say to people out there every single week, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.